morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'd like to announce or introduce our panelists. Neil Trevitt.
Yep. Hey, Susan. Hey, everyone. Good to see everyone here. So my name's Neil Trevitt. My day job's at NVIDIA. I'm here representing Khronos. I'm the Khronos president. Khronos is an open standards organization. We do standards that are relevant to the metaverse, Openxr, Vulkan, Webgl, GLTF. It turns out that they're metaverse relevant standards, which is great because we started them years ago, but it's good that the metaverse needs them too.
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha Good. I work for Microsoft as a developer advocate, and I'm the co-chair of W3C Immersive.
Yeah.
Mike.
Hi everyone. My name is Aisha Good. I work for Microsoft, and I'm here representing W3C Immersive Web. We are working on Webxr device APIs. I'm the co-chair.
And I'm David Morin. I work at Epic Games. I'm the Director of Industry Relations for Media Entertainment in Film and Television. There I take care mostly of open source initiative and open initiative that we have in the industry. Epic Games is the maker of Fortnite, as you know, and open is a very important concept within the company that we not only carry internally with the Unreal Engine code being open, but also with the industry. As part of that, I am Executive Director of the Academy Software Foundation, which is an organization created 4 years ago by the Academy of Motion Picture Art and Science and the Linux Foundation to help and promote the engineers, the developers that work in the film industry around open source projects and move these open source projects in a stable place where they can be developed and become open standards.
And I also wanted to mention that I'm here also representing the Openxr cloud, and we're a small group of independent, mostly developers and a few other people such as myself, writing protocols and for interoperability for the spatial web. So Neil, why don't you start us out with giving us a little bit of context of what we're talking about today when we talk about the metaverse?
Sure. The easy questions first.
Yeah.
So I think that most people, when they hear the term metaverse, have some concept that it's going to be probably a mixture of the connectedness of the web plus some kind of spatial computing. It's going to be a lot of different technologies coming together. I think that's really the one thing that you can bank on. We don't know quite how it's all going to come together, but it's going to include a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to have 3D, it's going to have advanced user interfaces, including AR and VR. It's going to have large servers, hopefully supporting eventually millions of real-time users, although we can only do hundreds right now. It's going to have really advanced tooling to create content, both professional content and user content. There's probably going to be some AI in there helping us do it. It's going to be a whole variety of geospatial services, positioning services, so we can overlay the virtual and real worlds. And all of that stuff and much more, it's all going to have to work together if we're going to have something that we would call the metaverse. So we're going to need interoperability between all of these pieces of technology, and we're going to need lots of it. We're going to need hardware to talk to software. We're going to need web APIs to talk to native APIs. The authored content is going to have to be transportable between different experiences and worlds on the metaverse. The whole geospatial scene has got to enable the virtual world and the real world to be overlaid. So to make all of that interoperable, we're going to need innovation. Proprietary technology is important because there's stuff we don't know how to do, and that's going to be innovated probably first in proprietary products. But some of that collaborative engineering is going to happen in open source, and eventually, once technology becomes proven, we're going to need open standards so multiple people can implement that technology in their own markets for their own customers and get that pervasive fan out of technology. And so we're going to need everything. All these threads are going to come together in very complex ways. And we need to know when to use the right tool for the right job.
So you're talking about open standards and open source. And can you, David, for us, differentiate that and talk a little bit more about the differences and what's needed?
Yes. So open source is a concept that's been there ever since there's been software written on this planet. But it has grown and it has changed over time in its role in our industries. Today, open source is a force for good in the internet as we know it, and is used in a large part of the stack for the existing internet is open source. Moving to the metaverse, so at Epic, the metaverse, we don't know what it's going to be, but we have an opinion of what we'd like it to be. And again, the key word is open. It's very important for us that the metaverse be open, and that in the way that the internet as it is now has been created with a lot of open standards and is run on a lot of open source code, we are hoping and working toward keeping the metaverse, which we see as the next coming of the internet, the next version of the internet, that it also remains open. And so open source as itself is a way to develop software that is based a lot on software developers when they do their work coming up at a moment in time and saying, this piece of code that I'm writing right now is probably going to be written 15 times over in other companies. Why don't we open source it so we could all work on it together? So that's the basic principle of open source projects. The Academy Software Foundation has been created in the film industry to help those engineers who are starting open source projects. And there are millions of open source projects being started and they come up, they come down. It's a very vibrant community, engineering-driven community. But it needs help. If any one of those, from time to time, some of those projects will become open standard because everybody will adopt them. In the film industry, we have one called Openxr, for instance, or Opencolor.io, which are some of our projects at the foundation, where every studio, every movie that comes out uses these libraries. And they became open standard. No one said, this is a standard. It just became something that everybody used. But that doesn't happen too often. And there are times where you need to specify a standard, an open standard, and to help the industry move forward, you cannot just rely on the organic growth. And that's where, sending back the ball to Neil, there has to be open standard specification to get the world going. So the metaverse, whatever it is, has to be open. And based on open source code developed by engineers who see the needs as they happen, but also with the specification of open standards to bring together that kind of code.
So you bring up an interesting point. You said that some of those open standards get adopted and many don't. What causes adoption of one over another?
It's very difficult to predict, and that's the beauty of the open source ecosystem, is that engineers do things and very much based on the needs of the code, the problem they're solving. And what will make an open standard or not is really hard to forecast. And we can all have a crystal ball, but what's important is to enable the community, the vibrant community of open source developers, to do their work free of issues and blockage that they have in front of them, be it legal or license-oriented or politics. All of that needs to be taken care of so that engineers can do their work. And then the best code will come to the surface if you leave it as it is. And sometimes you need help to, when you build something or you want to build something like the Metaverse, then you need to think through all the various pieces of code that are there and specify some parts of what the stack will be.
So you need to, in our experience, open standards to be adopted, which is the right measure of success. You need the right functionality, so it's actually solving a real problem that's going to make a commercial difference to the people that use it. And it's got to be at the right time. It's very easy to try to make standards before technology is proven, or to do it too late once fragmentation has already set in. So you need timing and the right functionality. And it's easy to start standardization that isn't going to work. At Khronos now we have a very well-established exploratory group process, so we actually get all the interested parties to come and really convince us that the standard is going to be needed before we start. And it's actually proven to be pretty successful. It really builds consensus on what we should do before we start. So.
And Aisco, how can you help us to understand how that works in the WC3? Open standards, open source, where does it all fit in?
Yeah, thankfully we don't have a lot of time, so we pick the ones that we really need to work on. So every 2 years we make a plan for the future, and all of the participating companies at W3C, Immersive Web, we ask for their vote, and we ask that somebody would start experimenting early on. So we have an incubation period. That's when we start experimenting, and then once we have enough information to talk about it intelligently, and also we know that this is how we want it to work, we move it to our working group where our editors start writing the specification. So most of the time there's browser implementers who implement it before it becomes a standard.
Okay. And so when you say, who are the people? Like, I know Neil and David, large companies are mostly working with your organizations. How can individual developers participate in this ecosystem?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Everything we do is open source on our GitHub. GitHub.com/immersiveweb is our organization. And you can go there and directly either propose anything that you are interested, or file an issue into the repo directly that you really want things to happen, or you're not sure how things are going to work. And the other way is to join our community work group. So we have the working group, which has some legal implications, and you have to join and pay a fee. But our community group is open to everyone, so anyone can join. And we really would like your input, and what are your pain points, and how we can make it easy and backward compatible forever on the web.
And I know we talked about, David, that although large companies are the people that are maintaining or managing the standards and the projects, but that anyone can contribute to the open source code.
Yes, so the way the Academy Software Foundation is set up, it is open to any one individual. There is no cost. It's free for any engineer to join any of the projects and participate. So if tomorrow morning you have an interest on these libraries that are on our website that are used in a lot of movies, you're interested in participating and joining the community, not just as a developer, but also as someone doing documentation, and we need all kinds of skill sets to help. You can join. There's no cost. It's free. The way we offer our service and the way we finance our operation is through company memberships. And even for the companies themselves, a company doesn't need to be a member to participate or to send their engineers to participate to our projects. It's called a foundation, the Academy Software Foundation, and it's really like, it is a non-profit, just like the one you give money to when you believe it's a good cause. So if you believe that open source is a good cause as a company, then you join as a member of the foundation, a company member, and there is tiers where you can contribute, your company can contribute. So we have most of the studios, most of the big vendors, software vendors that contribute to the film and television industry are as members of our foundation, and we thank them for their contribution. They provide the budget that allows us to have legal services, to have product management for our open source project, to help the engineers with all sorts of little things that you need to do. And we are able to help our community of engineers develop their software unencumbered by the environments that many of them were in before, where they were developing open source in a bit of an underground way inside their companies, with more of a tolerance from their management than an acknowledgement from their management. At the foundation, once a project is transferred to the foundation, the engineer becomes the center of our focus and our support, and we support our projects for growth very clearly.
Even Khronos, I mean, you're right, we're largely company-driven, but we have everyone from Apple and Google all the way down to single-person startup companies. But it is largely companies that join as members. But even though we're a standards organization, we love open source too. We have lots of open source projects which individuals are more than welcome to contribute to. Even the specifications we build are in open source. The specification document itself is in open source, so people can contribute and bug fix and get involved that way.
Great. Thank you for that. So this is the road from 3D to the metaverse. So let's go back to somewhat of the beginning. And can you talk about the evolution of Opengl to Webgl?
Sure. How long do we have?
Briefly.
Briefly. It's an interesting case study because again, the point of open standards is that it can take a proven technology and get it widely adopted throughout the industry. And Opengl, I think, is a great case study. So, the precursor to Opengl, for those of you who have gray hair like me, was IrisGL. Silicon Graphics was the preeminent 3D company back in the day. And 30 years ago, June, I think it might be like next week, 30 years ago, they took the momentous decision to release what had previously been a proprietary technology as an open standard, and that was Opengl 1.0. And very quickly, the 3D began to proliferate throughout the industry. PCs and PC-based workstations very quickly had Opengl, and enabling many more people to access the technology. Khronos took it over eventually, and then OpenGL was developed at Khronos because the mobile guys suddenly found that they needed 3D graphics, and Opengl was there as a standard. We could evolve it into OpenGL, kind of shape it for the mobile industry, and that is still available on pretty much every mobile phone in the universe today. OpenGL is by far the most widely adopted 3D API, and that in turn created the opportunity for Webgl, because browsers need to run everywhere. And so you can't really pick a technology that isn't widely available. And OpenGL being implemented by dozens of different GPU vendors, that made it available pretty much on every platform in the known galaxy. And that led to Webgl to be able to put the reach from the web stack down into the native 3D API, OpenGL, and Webgl 1 was born. Quite a long gestation period before it became widely available. There's quite a lot of steps to go through to get it deployed out through the whole ecosystem, but it's pervasive now. Now we have Webgl 2 that is now pervasive everywhere, and of course now we're moving on. 30 years is a long time for an API. Now we have the new generation APIs, including Vulkan, and the W3C is working on Web GPU, which is going to be awesome. Again, I think it's going to be a while before it really gets to be pervasive. But the W3C and Khronos we're working together to make sure that the developers have a smooth transition from Webgl 2 to Web GPU once it's widely available. So from that one small standard at the time, it's 3D. I honestly don't believe 3D would be as pervasive in the industry as it is today if we hadn't had Opengl 30 years ago.
And so I used to go.
Yeah.
What parallels can you draw between Opengl and Openxr and Webxr?
We have a lot of people who are working on both Openxr and Webxr. We are just focused on purely on the browser, and they are supporting any native application. So we do actually work very parallel to each other, and some of our specifications are implemented much faster on the Openxr, so we have a good starting point too. Yeah.
We regard Webxr as one of our most important customers for Openxr. We need to be doing what Webxr needs, and we need to be responsive. Having the native and web APIs working closely together is really critical.
Because we'd like to see what happened with Opengl move into the metaverse, right?
Right. And so far, is it working? Yeah, I think Webxr is hopefully benefiting, not having to port to dozens of different HMD hardware. So hopefully we're playing our part, and Webxr is doing awesome work in bringing XR capabilities into the web.
So during innovation, David, companies tend to work more closely to the chest, but what would cause them, or what's the impetus to use open source or to participate and adopt open standards?
So open source, the adoption of open source within the company liberates some of your engineering cycles to focus on the proprietary developments you want to do. So how is that? It's simple. If you're doing some part of your code that is being repeated in a number of other companies, competitions, other partners, etc., as an industry, we're not efficient. We're repeating the same code in some variation right and left. If we get together for that code that everybody's writing, which is not a differentiator at the end of the day, it's something that everybody needs. If we have a place or a number of places to go to write that code together, then you will need a lot less engineers. So if I needed 3 or 10 or 20 engineers to write this specific library I need for my application, and now I am teaming up with the other teams that were doing the same thing, I can put 5 of my engineers, and other companies do the same, and there's still a team of 20 engineers, maybe 30 engineers working on that library. And now it's becoming more of an open standard because we're all working on the same pool. And the other 15 engineers I had working on this, I can assign to things that are really important for differentiating my company and for competition and new innovation, et cetera. So by adopting open source, you're really you're saving money. You can reinvest your precious engineering money into things that really matter to you as a company. And as an industry, we're much the better and more efficient. So use open source. Do open source projects. Yeah.
Aishigu, what happens when large influential companies are slow to adapt or don't want to adapt to a major standard? How does that impact the industry as a whole?
It makes, all of our jobs harder, right? We are not getting there as fast as we can. And almost most of the companies are guilty of this, in my opinion. This should have been happening 5 years ago. But once we have implementers, then we can discuss. Whenever we have a new thing, if nobody is implementing, there's nothing to discuss. We can't really know every use case of other devices or different browsers. So we really do need them to join. Also, education-wise, too, that's very important. If one of the devices is not supporting Webxr, or then when we go teach and try to advocate it to the developers, it becomes really hard to say, like, hey, you develop once and you this is web, it will work everywhere. but it doesn't always.
I mean, in the end, it comes out to what David was saying, is that there needs to be benefit to a company. Every company needs to be making its best business decisions, whether it's to use open source or to use an open standard. No company should do it if it's not going to affect their bottom line. Basically, it comes down to that. So it's the job of the standards community to build really effective standards that can move the needle, and that's the way to drive adoption. You can't force companies to adopt an open standard if it's not going to do them any good. So again, you have to have the right standard at the right time. So it becomes a no-brainer for them, in a commercial sense, to use it. And that, if you can find the kind of the tipping point where that becomes, the calculus becomes obvious, that's when you get the rise in adoption.
Right, the value has to be there.
The value has to be
Yeah. So speaking of large companies, recently, and really the past 3 or 4 weeks, major players in the AR space, Snap, Google, and Niantic, have all released some kind of location API or VPS SDK. Are there any parallels, Aishugo, with the browser wars and as Mike from Artillery Intelligence calls it, the AR space race towards location-based AR?
Well, we have the spatial anchors at Azure for the last 4 years almost, which is also helping with the spatial location. And it is a very interesting technology, and there's a lot of other things to do. There's still research to be done. So the more the merrier, in my opinion. If there's a competition, we have a reason to refine it and make it better. But I'm hoping that we all learn from the browser wars of the 90s. And now when the companies talk about Metaverse, for example, they talk about enabling developers to build for Metaverse instead of building the Metaverse themselves.
So speaking of browsers also, that one of the things that Openxr Cloud works on is the concept of content discovery in spatial computing. How is that different from regular content discovery on web browser? And I know that at least Niantic and Snap are kind of working on their own ecosystem within there, and I hope that they will adopt a standard, and that's something that the Openxr Cloud is working on. I also want to mention just quickly, at the Openxr Cloud, we're very, very tiny. We're not organized like these other groups are. So if you are an independent developer and you want to make a difference, and you want to have an impact on standards development in spatial computing, Openxr Cloud might be a spot for you. So there's a lot of opportunities there. So speaking of location-based, one of the other things that Openxr Cloud has worked on is our director, Jean-Eric Vignier. He worked with the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC, to write the specs for GeoPose. And so GeoPose is a universal coordinate system that can locate an object in 6DoF at a centimeter accuracy.
Yeah.
So you have some good news for us. Can you please share?
I'm not sure it's news.
It's good news for us. It's good news for the standard,
well,
the GeoPose standard.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday. No, we love GeoPose, and we're working to use it in the Khronos standards that need positional information. I think it's, just zooming out, I think it's a very good illustration. There are dozens of standards organizations, and you have some of them here. But there are many, many standards organizations. The good news is that each standards organization has its own focus and area of expertise. And the smart standards organizations don't try to do what's someone else's expertise. Rather, you should use the good work that is going on in those other standards organizations. And GeoPose is a perfect example of the OpenAI cloud and the Open Geospatial Consortium. It sounds simple, right? Where are you on the Earth? It sounds just like latitude, longitude. It's not that simple. It's a lot of good work, complex and insightful work has gone into GeoPose. And I do see GeoPose being picked up by lots of different standards. I mean, it is a thing that needs to be used by APIs and file formats. So every time you need a positioning information, there it is in a GeoPose format. If you can all agree and coordinate on that, I think it'll be great for the whole geospatial
Yeah,
area.
As someone who's worked in some of these SDKs and APIs, I know it would make a difference.
Right.
It would make developing content easier,
Right.
certainly. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious to get your views, David, on how do you foresee, or do you foresee geospatially located things, places, impacting virtual worlds like Fortnite and Roblox? I know they're not VR yet, but I still see them as immersive worlds for sure.
Absolutely.
Anyone that has a teenager or tween knows that it's extremely immersive. So
Yes, this concept of immersion. So obviously here, Augmented World Expo, it's all about the mix of the real and the virtual together, and that's really important, everything that you've been discussing. At Epic, with Fortnite, we see Fortnite as a prototype of the metaverse. It's a game today, but in that game, we've tried a lot of things that points to the kind of experiences that you could have in the future in the metaverse, and that you can have today in Fortnite and Roblox and a number of other games like this, where, as you said, the players are immersed in their mind. They're in that world, even though they're in using traditional input device to get into there. But they're in there with their friends. It's a social environment where they can play. They can derive a lot of joy playing. And our opinion of what the metaverse should be is that it should be like that. The metaverse should be free, open, as Fortnite is, and you can buy things in there, and there's a lot of room for a business model and companies making lots of money. But you buy what you want in that world, and you derive a lot of joy doing so. So in Fortnite, when you play the game, you can play the game as a generic character for free, but you can also become Spider-Man if you want to. And there's a cost to that. And you don't have to buy it, but you can if you want. And if you put that money, it's because you want to be that character, and it will bring you joy to play the game in that capacity. So that whole model is what we hope will go to the metaverse. With regards to, so there's a whole aspect of, there'll be these virtual worlds, right, that will populate the metaverse, and maybe when you go shopping on Amazon.com, you won't have a bunch of flat images, but you'll be walking in the store the way you walk into the world of Fortnite, for instance. So that's part of the vision that we have for the metaverse. But as you do that, which device you use, and do you have an immersive device, VR goggles or augmented reality device on your head? This is all, the answer is yes. We want that to be part of the game. And we're not as focused. We support the device. We're very happy with Openxr. With the case study there was that we had to develop drivers for every one of the different headsets, right? And that was a lot of engineering time repeated, and everybody was doing the same thing in every one of their companies. At Unity and all the other game engines had to do the exact same thing. It was deeply needed to have Openxr, to have an API. It's simple in retrospect, but it was work to get it to happen. And now we support fully Openxr, and we were glad this morning to see Magic Leap supporting Openxr, as well as now running their device on Android, open source operating system. The benefits for that are immense. You can refocus companies can refocus their engineering on what really matters that needs to be developed. The wild frontier of all these developments that are competing with each other, there's a lot of that in the world of augmented reality. But that's good. You want that to happen. But as soon as possible, as soon as you can, you want to bring those different competing technologies together so that they're part of the stack so that you can continue to innovate.
You bring up a really good point and something that we didn't talk about before in terms of incentivizing companies to adopt standards, and the pain point of having to build something over and over again for different pieces of hardware is a great incentive for wanting to push and have the industry adopt standards.
And it is a little more work, you know, to look around and say, oh, who else is doing this, and let's do it together. And sometimes it's a lot more work, and so we have to recognize that. But we, organizations like ours, are there to facilitate and to help clear the way for all the problems that you may have working with others, so that there is a safe place where everybody can go. You know, somebody will say antitrust and things like that. So we have lawyers that put a sandbox in place with rules. So there are things that if the competitors work with each other, there are rules that you have to follow. You cannot talk about certain things. You can talk about other things. This is all very clarified at the beginning of every meeting. There's an antitrust slide that comes and describes the rules of those meetings. So we provide these sort of guidelines to be able to work together on software that makes sense, and we protect that process so that it can grow.
And I also just want to point out that you had mentioned for independent developers that are wanting to maybe start an open source project, your foundation has a lot of materials and resources to guide them and help them setting up all that infrastructure.
Yes, the Academy Software Foundation is a partnership between the Academy of Motion Picture Art and Science and the Linux Foundation. So the Linux Foundation is our partner. Linux is the granddaddy of all open source projects, runs a big part of the web today. And the Linux Foundation has more than 500 projects like ours, like the Academy Software Foundation, that they run in all kinds of industries. And they bring to the table a lot of tools to be able to help into the development of open source.
Thank you. So one of the other things that we talk about at Openxr Cloud is the need for what we call reality modeling language, similar to the way HTML describes a web page. How, moving forward in the future, will we describe a scene either in the virtual world or the real world? So a precursor to that is the universal scene description developed by Pixar that's widely adopted and used in the motion picture industry. Where does that fit into the evolution of moving into the metaverse? What is needed that it lacks?
Yes.
And how do we get there?
Right. So Universal Scene Description, USD, is a great example of open source project that was started at a time where Pixar themselves needed to redo their entire data management system, and the engineers in charge had the vision to say, well, everybody's probably going to do that, you know, in the next few years, and they're already doing that. Every other studios in the film industry doing big movies that have big digital worlds will have to do that. So they open source a project from the get-go, very visionary, and they continue developing it for their own needs, but other studios then at first looked at it and then contributed. And to make the story short, today it's becoming an open standard in the film industry. Not everybody uses it, but a lot of studios have come in to use it. And that has to do with the growth of worlds, so the big movies, be it the big Marvel movies and Pixar movies, and all the studios have movies where you create visual effects, what used to be a shot-by-shot process. Now you create the world, and then you go shoot in that world. So this complex content generation process that is made even more complex by the fact that as you create those worlds, a lot of people have opinions about them, and there's a lot of versions of the world that are created, and sometimes you want to go back to a certain version for a certain character at a certain place. So you need an engine that is able to manage not only the world, but the process of creating the world. It's a fairly sophisticated piece of engineering, universal scenes description, that allows for all these processes to be built on. That's why it's been adopted by many. And now it's considered for application outside of the film industry. So at the Academy Software Foundation, so USD is a project that is at Pixar. It's not in the Academy Software Foundation, but at the Academy Software Foundation, we help all open source projects, ours and those that are residing outside of the foundation. USD is very important, and we're working to develop it within the film industry. Now, when we talk about USD and the concept of managing these huge worlds is something that is going to be key to the metaverse. And there are ways to do that when you build a game. There are ways to do that when you build films. USD is a big part of that. We believe that in time, we'll need to manage immense worlds that people will access at scale all over the world, using all sorts of tools and in more granular tools like GLTF, and to be able to access those. So USD may play a role in this world that is being developed. We're certainly both wanting to help if Pixar wants to grow it in that direction, and help them supplement and add to their engineering force if need be, and participate in that part and the development of the metaverse that way.
So Neil, can you wrap it up for us in terms of how does GLTF fit into USD? And we're all talking GLTF like everybody knows what that is. Why don't you say a little bit about what that is before?
Sure. So first of all, the USD is awesome. GLTF is awesome too. So GLTF comes from the web and is growing, and USD comes from the visual effects community and is growing. And the two are going to interact. I hope the industry can organize itself so we interact in a good, coherent, engineering-based way. But GLTF is a delivery format. It's not an authoring format like USD. It's designed to be like the JPEG of 3D. Compact, easy to process. You can process it anywhere. Even my mom's cell phone. Even my mom knows how to view a GLTF now. It's everywhere. PowerPoint has it. PDF is about to have it. It's an ISO standard, and it's pretty well adopted everywhere. And part of the reason it's being adopted everywhere is we've deliberately kept it simple with a focus on its delivery mission. But it's evolving. We now have physically based rendered materials. So it's getting pretty sophisticated. But we're riding the rising tide as mobile devices and web browsers become more capable. We build those capabilities into GLTF. I hope that USD can have a specification soon, because that's what USD needs to reach its full potential. Like GLTF is a specification. USD needs to be deployed into multiple markets, and so for that it needs to become a proper open standard with a specification. We'd love to help. Who knows what's going to happen, but yeah, it's a good, at the moment it's good synergy between USD and GLTF. We love distilling USD in authoring pipelines down to GLTF for delivery. That's the current state of the art.
Thank you. So we're running a little late for questions, but we do have about 5 or 6 minutes left for questions. So I'm not seeing the microphones, but are they out there?
They're there.
Oh, okay. Yes, I see them now. So if you can line up, if you have questions, line up at the microphone. And while they're lining up, can you just tell us what the acronym GLTF stands for?
It stands for GL transmission format, but it's nothing really to do with GL anymore. It's just a historical. It's just GLTF.
Okay, I was just curious because I didn't know. Yes.
Hello, thanks so much for this panel. Really appreciating it so far. What role do open standards like Openxr and Webxr have to play when it comes to implementing accessibility features like captions?
Like capture?
Like captions and subtitles.
Captions? So Openxr does everything that an HMD needs to do except the rendering. So it's all of the pose and the controls and everything. But it doesn't dictate what's actually being rendered. So that will be part of the application, and that will be using a rendering API like Opengl or Vulkan, and that would be up to the application to do captioning if that's what the application needs.
Same is true for Webxr. So we are the device API, and we work with the sensors, and we help you find out what are the capabilities, but we are not rendering anything. So that has been the challenge, and I absolutely believe in the captioning, and if we were rendering anything, maybe we would have much more to do with accessibility. But currently, the best we could do with your help, Dylan, was to have accessibility guidelines and recommendations so far.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey there. Thank you
Hey.
so much for the talk. Right now I'm representing a company. It's really a couple developers on a Discord server, and they're stringently free open source software. The advice I got when I was like, I'll just get a t-shirt and come here and do the thing, the first advice I got was patents, stealth mode, et cetera, and they're like, absolutely not. They want free open source software. They want 501c3. They want all of that. So for a company like that still needs money in order to even get to an MVP or even reach a level where they can sort of fill out an application for one of the programs that you guys are offering. What sort of advice? I know there seems to be something around like open source funds, but even then you start getting into like what are the demands for ROI for those funds and all these questions. So I'm curious what your sort of insights around that are.
Well, I think you need to, as in any company, you have your business plan and you have something specific that you want to develop that is unique to you. That's based on open source, a stack. It's a great strategy to identify from the get-go the components that are going to be developed with others, right, and make that open source, and then to have your own differentiator on top of that. There's a number of ways to grant can be obtained in all kinds of ways. If you're an open source company, you have the same number of investment options that every other company have. There are places that are specific. I can talk about the Unreal Engine, the Epic Mega Grants, where we're very open source friendly. This is a place where you can submit a project. There are specifications for that on the Epic Mega Grants site on the Unreal Engine website, and you can present there to get part of your budget for a project financed that way. And if you are looking for any pointers in terms of how to work with others, develop your open source projects in the best, most present way, we can advise you at the foundation on how to do that. You should send us a brief if it relates in any way to the film industry. I would be glad to look into it and to help you develop your company.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I think we have time for just one more question. So for you?
Did you have any specific licenses in mind, and which licenses do you think would get more people to join free and open source for AR?
Something a little difficult to hear you, but something about licensing.
Yeah,
How many?
Which licenses do you think will get more companies to join open source AR projects?
So without being specific to open source AR project, at the Academy Software Foundation, we recommend Apache 2.0 as the best open source license to use if you're developing open source code that you want to be reusable in commercial applications out there. Apache 2.0. Look at this one. Okay.
If it's quick, we have one more minute.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thank you, guys. If we take the web as an example, we have standards like HTML and HTTP. The presence of those standards doesn't really prevent higher level services from being built as walled gardens. What are your thoughts around this?
I couldn't hear the last part.
So I'm curious about your thoughts around walled
James,
gardens.
I'm so sorry. I'm being told to cut it, but I know that,
Yeah, I'll come talk to you.
yeah, we'll be available after to finish your question. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, so thank you all
Thank you.
for coming out.
Being here.